Okay, let's go through some of these. And did anyone have any issue accessing Menti before I reveal the responses? And you feel free to unmute yourself at any time and speak if you like. Okay, let's see what some of the answers are. All right. All right, so some of the responses. All right, so equal piece to anyone who would like one. Okay. Who has already eaten dessert today? So this could be based on what we think, some form of deservedness. So if you haven't had dessert already, so maybe you deserve it more. There isn't a fair way because some people don't like cake. That's true, right? So some people may not even want what it is that's on offer. And we shouldn't be giving cake to people who don't want it because there are people who who do. Divide by the number of people who need/want cake. Okay, so need and want. So that would be maybe equally. So if could be everybody on the call, it could be a subset of those people. Ask who wants a piece of cake and what size piece they would like, large, medium, small, and then cut and distribute the pieces accordingly. Okay. Okay. Yeah. That's another way. First, ask who wants the cake and then divide it into squares so that no cake is wasted. Okay. I'd like to see that more about, so a lot of these are about asking people if they want it, ask who wants it and then cut that many slices. Find out if anyone is diabetic, gluten-free, and on a diet and find out who wants it. Again, more wanting the cake. Ask people what size pieces of the whole would work best for them and then divide the cake accordingly. Okay. I see a strong theme here of making sure that the recipients of the cake actually want it and get the types of pieces that they desire. Cut the cake into equal halves 12 times. Okay. So we get smaller and smaller pieces, but it may be a little bit, it's more equal. But it gets a taste. Cut it into pieces, slices based on hunger. Okay, so maybe we could develop some sort of a hunger scale. How many people have had lunch? I know, and then go from there and kind of rank people based on that. And separate the layers and then cut the cake to get more slices out of the one cake. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that one's interesting. So then you could maybe have like four flat cakes and then a bunch of small slices. Perhaps you could probe the needs of everyone in the room and then equitably distribute the cake, the resource to fill the need. And then lastly, those who need more cake should get more cake. Okay, so lots of the theme here is like making sure that people are getting it based on their needs and their wants. Okay, so all this is to say there are lots of similarities here, but there's certainly some differences in what ways that we think it would be fair to divide the cake. Okay, I'm going to exit Menti for a second. Okay, everyone should be able to see my screen again. All right. So in thinking about this problem, so again, all of you had slightly different answers to this question about how we would go about dividing this resource, which is in this case, a cake, fairly. Deborah Stone, she argued that there are three factors that have to be taken into consideration when deciding issues of fairness and justice and the distribution of resources. The first is the items. And so in this case, it's the chocolate cake, but more often than not in the policy realm, we're thinking about public resources like tax dollars, tax credits, expenditures that are going towards particular issues that are intended to improve the welfare of the public in sometimes specific populations within the overall US population. And so, and it's also the issues that make it on the policy agenda that gets attention. So it's back to this issue of both, where are we getting where are the resources going? What are the items? The second factor she categorizes as the recipients. So we've defined the recipients as the people in this room, but as you can see, going through that thought experiment, you all have come up with different ways of thinking about who the recipient should be. So, you know, in that case, it was more based on need and want. But once we've defined the boundaries or the resources, we have to decide who will benefit. And at the policy level, this decision is really heavily influenced by who's deserving of those resources. And I really underline deserving because the deservingness is categorized by need, and then need is also a complex or controversial topic, because some people the level of need is also need. We have to figure out the level of need in order to know who's deserving. And there are many ways that we try to demonstrate need, especially within various public programs. The third factor is the process. And so this is where we less often, and I actually didn't see very much of this in your responses, but it's the process by which the distribution of the resources occur. And we often make implicit assumptions about what that process should look like. We spend a lot more time discussing the items and the resources, right? So that's like what should be redistributed. Is it healthcare services, and like how and how much is needed and who should get it? But we spent much less time defining the process by which those resources should be distributed to those recipients in a manner that we think is fair. And I would say some of the process that you all mentioned in your responses were, you know, asking people, right? That is a process. And the difficulty there is that, you know, because in this instance, the cake is a scarce resource, and there's but so many ways that you can divide it. And the cake will run out depending on the amount of people in the room. You know, it's not always feasible to divide it based on what people want. And then that's why we have elected officials sometimes that go about doing that. But anyway, in this area, some people argue that the outcomes of the distribution may be unequal, but the process is fair. So some people may get more and some people may get less, but we believe that the process was a fair one, and so the unequal outcomes are acceptable. So here are some ways that we could divide the cake. And just thinking through some others. So there is the recipients. When we're thinking about the recipients of the cake or some other type of resource, there's membership, right? So we have, you know, who are people who are not on the call today because for some reason they couldn't make it and they didn't know we were going to have cake. So why should it just be amongst the people here? It could be among the people who registered and couldn't come or confirmed and couldn't come. There's also, you know, ways that we could think about it based on rank. So we could divide the cake based on something like merit. What if everyone here had to complete some sort of assessment before the session, and we ranked you all based on your scores and then gave the cake to the highest scoring participants, maybe not even bothering with the people with the lowest scores and just giving, I don't know, half the cake or the entire cake to the person who performed the best. Some people might think merit is the way to go. And often, especially in policy debates, we're thinking about as if there's equal opportunity, which is very hard to define and agree to whether that's the case. People think that a meritocratic system is the way to divide resources. There's also group. And so a lot of the time when we're thinking about redistributive justice, we're thinking about this kind of recipients based on group membership. So what if we wanted to divide the cake based on the communities that are represented on the call today? We could have equal blocks, but unequal slices across individuals. So there may be an overrepresentation of certain groups that we think are more deserving on the call. And so, or maybe an underrepresentation, but we think those groups are more deserving, and we have two people getting half the cake and then the rest of the folks on the call getting the rest. And similarly, some major divisions in society are relevant to distributive justice, and just membership in that group alone on these divisions sometimes outweigh the individual characteristics of the person within that group. And so those are some of the ways that you can divide the cake just based on the recipients and their deservedness. There's other ways of redefining the boundaries of the item and the value of the item. which is about, some people did bring this up, which is is it, somebody said something about, had you already had dessert today? Is the cake a part of today's lunch? Is it a part of today's meals, or is it a part of this week's diet? The more you pull the camera back, the lens back, or you redefine the boundaries, the time horizon even, we may see, we have different interpretations of what's fair, right? This might be the only dessert that you'll have all month for some people, and the others may have dessert regularly, So, and then in terms of process, I didn't see as much process come up in the responses, aside from the asking of people, but some people have asserted that, say, a competition might be the way to go. So sometimes this thought experiment is run with students, and like econ and math students might say, everybody should be just given a fork. We stand at opposite sides of the room, and we can all run into the center and eat as much of it as you can, and everybody has the equal instrument, and we can maybe even make try to reduce any other barriers, but the competition is the way to go. Another way to go which is again, unequal slices, but equal forks. And then in the process, a lottery, right? We've seen lotteries also used for example, in the Oregon health insurance experiment, where people were kind of randomly given access to Medicaid. And so this randomness gives people equal chances, at least in theory. We think random means fair, because they have a random chance of getting a good slice. And maybe some people may not get any, but at least they had the chance, and the lottery was the fair way to go. And then lastly, a common approach is to voting, right? So we could elect someone on the call today to be our chocolate cake czar, and then they get to decide who gets what slices. And we may think that's fair because we've all had a vote, and we decided we think this person is the best person to decide, and that's one way to approach it. So there are many, all this is to say, there are many concepts of a fair distribution of resources. And when we're thinking about equity, these are the types of conceptual tensions that we're dealing with, and it has implications for how we define equity, but also, and importantly, those definitions then extend into how we measure it. And the definitions also get baked into administrative programs and how we evaluate those programs, who's eligible, who's not eligible, over what time period. So it's a high stakes, they're high stakes decisions. And so I know we're bucking up against this was the first segment of the workshop, and it really is to start sparking some thoughts about what we really mean when we say equity, and within those definitions. So the most common ones is talking about fairness and justice, but how do we take these more abstract concepts and then bring them down to a level where we can build them into our programs and measure them? And so in the next series, we were going to be talking more about the definitions. And so the definitions that are used in research, but also in policy and planning and evaluation. And so it's not just about, you've seen some of these definitions before, but it's really with a focus on measurement and not on just defining for advocacy. And I think that's also a distinction that we want to draw. While many of these definitions are very important for advocacy and coalition building, when it comes to, operationalizing them, we have to put some more meat on them in order for us to really understand whether or not we're meeting the goals that are defined within these definitions. And so again, very sorry for the technical difficulties for today. And so we were only able to make it through the first segment, but I hope this at least first activity gives you an idea of where we're trying to go with this. And in the next segment, we'll go through part 2 and part 3, and we'll have a bit more discussion. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you next time.